Okay, so last night we left off, we had just introduced the three main categories of listing agreements. Remember, a listing agreement is an agency contract with what kind of client? What kind of client would sign a listing agreement? A seller would sign a listing agreement. What kind of client would sign, we don't call it this, but I'm going to call it this just to test you on the vocabulary, a selling agreement? What kind of client would sign a selling agreement? That would be a buyer client. We don't call it that. We call it a buyer agency agreement. But the buyer side is the selling side of the transaction, and the seller side is the what? Listing side of the transaction. Well, we talked about the three main categories of listing agreements, and I'll just back up real quickly and run through them. We talked about the exclusive right to sell. And we said the key thing about an exclusive right to sell listing is that no matter where the buyers came from, because there's three potential places the buyer could come from, no matter where the buyer came from, the listing firm was going to be owed a commission because that listing agreement was a big enough funnel to catch every single buyer. Does that make sense for everybody? And then we talked about an exclusive agency listing. And we said with an exclusive agency listing, the funnel had been shrunk down so that if the buyer came from the listing firm producing a buyer, we'd still get paid. If the buyer came from a cooperating firm producing a buyer, we'd still get paid. But if the buyer came from what source? What's the third possible source? The seller produces the buyer themselves, then what would happen? We would not get paid in an exclusive agency listing. And then finally, we got to the open listing. And in the open listing, we would only get paid, the listing firm would only get paid under one circumstance. And what is that circumstance? If they produce the buyer themselves, if they sell it. If the buyer comes from any other source, then the listing firm would not be owed a commission. Well, now that we've established those three types, remember I said in the real world, you're only really going to encounter which one? The exclusive right to sell. So now, this is going to be your first glimpse at what a real document looks like in a real estate transaction in North Carolina. Because what we want to do is take you through the exclusive right to sell listing agreement that comes from the North Carolina Association of Realtors. Now, I've kind of introduced this point before, but let me remind you, not all of you will be realtors. And that's not because some of you are going to fail the exam, that's not what I mean. Not every broker is a realtor, but every realtor is a what? Broker. In other words, you can't become a realtor unless you're a broker, but just because you're a broker, you don't have to be a realtor. Does that make sense to everybody? People decide if they want to join the Association of Realtors because they decide that there are benefits worth joining. And we talked about some of those benefits. What was one of the huge benefits we talked about? The MLS, and then finally what? The forms. They have a whole set of forms ready to use for their members. And this form is one of them, the exclusive right to sell form. So if you take a glance at it real quickly, the one I just passed out, the exclusive right to sell listing agreement, look in the bottom left. They make it very clear who this form belongs to, don't they? That block R logo. This form belongs to the North Carolina Association of Realtors, especially created for use here in North Carolina to comply with all of the North Carolina laws and rules. Now, it can only be used by people who are what? Realtor members. They have to be members of the North Carolina Association of Realtors. Remember that the North Carolina Real Estate Commission does not publish forms. The Real Estate Commission is not telling you, use this form. Why do you think the Real Estate Commission is making me teach you this form? It's the most common one. It's the one you're most likely to encounter in a listing in North Carolina because almost any residential listing is going to be placed into what service? The MLS, which means it's going to be listed by a realtor, which means it's going to be done using this form. Does that make sense for everybody? So that's why we teach you this particular form. Now this form has a lot of things that the Real Estate Commission requires to be there. This is where I'm going to jump back and forward some from your slides to the form, because your slides basically have the rules for things that have to be in a listing agreement. And then I want to show you where those things are in this particular listing agreement. Does that make sense to everybody? So I'm not going to go through the listing agreement line by line with you, because number one, you'd forget by the time you got to doing it with a client anyway, and number two, you don't need that to pass the test. What you need to know are some of the high spots of this listing agreement. So one of the first things we need to talk about is an expiration date. We said that every agency agreement has to have an expiration date. Remember that conversation?
Yes.
Every agency agreement's got to have an expiration date. So let's look at the one on this form. If you look in paragraph number 1, it says term of the agreement. Does everybody see that? Term of the agreement. And down at the very end of that paragraph 1 on line C, it says expiration date. This agreement shall terminate at midnight on, and you're expected to fill in the date that this agreement's going to expire. So right there it complies with rule number 1 from the Real Estate Commission that we must have an expiration date. Does that make sense to everybody? So now I want to talk about the first thing that's in your bullet point on the slide package. I'll flip back over here. This thing called the extender clause. Not Santa Claus, but extender clause, right? The extender clause. What do you think we're going to be extending? What date did we just talk about?
Expiration date.
The expiration date. So what is an expiration date? It's a date when the agreement does what? Expires. But what does that mean? Ends. It's a date when this agreement ends. What is the purpose of this agreement?
Keep relationships with the seller.
Where is it? Get paid.
Get paid.
The whole purpose of this agreement is to get the listing firm what? Paid. This is basically an employment contract between the seller and the listing firm. So it's going to outline when the seller owes the listing firm a commission, for what reason the seller would owe the listing firm a commission. Does that make sense for everybody? And so the expiration date becomes really important, because the seller only owes us a commission if we sell it during what period of time? While the agreement's in effect. So what would happen after the expiration date, do you think? You don't get paid. Now, let me present a hypothetical situation to you, because you're right. You don't get paid. So I've listed Marlo's house for her. My firm, I've listed her house for sale. And the agreement expires on August 10th. That's our expiration date. August 10th, 2018. You with me so far? Now, I had an open house this weekend. One last sort of big hurrah. I'm trying to get a buyer. I've been working on this thing for a while. And I had a big open house on Saturday. Had some people through there, and had a buyer who's very interested. So I've been talking with them since Saturday. I showed them the house on Saturday, the open house. They wanted to go back Sunday afternoon to take a second look. I took them back over there Sunday afternoon. Now, I'm not representing them as a dual agent. I'm simply a seller's agent. Is everybody with me? They bring an offer. They call me this morning. We want to make an offer. So I went and met with them today at lunch. And we wrote up the offer. Now who do I represent? The seller, Marlo. So I've emailed Marlo, the seller, this offer. What's today's date? The 7th, right? When did I say our listing expires? On the 10th. So Marlo is deciding what to do with this offer. And she starts to think. She's like, I really wish they had waited till next week to make me this offer. Because if they had waited till next week, I wouldn't have to do what? I wouldn't have to pay this commission. I wouldn't have to pay this 6% commission if they had waited till next week. And so then so now here I am. I'm trying to call Marlo back. What do you want to do about this offer? And she says, well, I'm still thinking. I'll let you know. And then I call her tomorrow. Guess what? She's still what?
Thinking.
And I call her the next day, and she's still what?
Thinking.
Thinking. Then magically we get to Saturday, and she has made up her mind. And she wants to accept the offer, except she wants to accept it after what has happened. After the expiration date. And why has she thought for so long about that thing? Because she thinks she doesn't have to pay a commission, except she didn't really read this listing agreement when we went over it, because it has something called an extender clause built into it. Now, see, I have to explain to you that way so you understand what the extender clause is for, right? Because would a seller do that to you? Uh-huh. Yes, they would. So scroll down. I'm going to do some jumping around, but I want to show you where this is in the actual listing agreement. So it's on page 3, I believe. It might be on 4. Let me find it here. Actually, let me go back and make sure I didn't skip over it. Oh, sorry, it's on page 2. Bottom of page 2. Thought it was the top of page 3, it's bottom of page 2. Bottom of page 2, under paragraph 7, where it says firm's compensation. Does everybody see where I am? Now, this is the section where it would outline how much we're charging, right? How much did I say we were charging? 6%. So it's going to say 6% right there on that line, on the compensation line. Pay a total fee of 6% of the gross sales price, or 5%, or 7%, whatever we negotiated with Marlowe. But in this case, it was 6%. But look down at Roman numeral 3. It's the last paragraph on the page. Does everybody see where I am? It says, if the circumstances in 1 or 2 have not occurred, in other words, if we didn't sell the property, and if within blank days after the expiration date, the seller sells the property upon any terms whatsoever to any person with whom the seller, firm, or any cooperating real estate firm communicated regarding the property during the term of this agreement, then the seller's going to do what? The seller's going to pay us. The seller is going to owe us a commission. Everybody with me on that? That's what the extender clause does. It is there to prevent that situation. It is there to prevent that seller from intentionally allowing the agreement to expire to avoid paying a commission. Yes, ma'am.
So but it says as long as
I haven't got, you talking about the however part yet?
yeah.
Yeah, hold your horse in just a minute. I'm glad you spotted it. Good spot. I haven't got that far. In all caps, does it have a big word there, though? However, seller shall not be obligated to pay the fee if a valid listing agreement is entered into between seller and who? Another real estate broker. So it only protects against her trying to intentionally let the agreement expire and not pay at all. If she hires somebody else, who's going to be entitled to the commission? The new firm's going to get paid. It doesn't protect me if she hires somebody else. It only protects me if she just lets the agreement expire and doesn't hire anybody else.
So can she still go back and find that particular buyer and try to buy it under? That would be stupid though.
What now?
For her to try to. I am her, but.
Yes, you are her.
Well, you might be upset with him, want to stick it to him, and then so you just like let him get the commission, give it to somebody else.
Okay, but either way, it's gonna get somebody. Gonna get
Somebody's going to get paid. So, as JJ said, maybe you're sick of dealing with me. Could you wait until the thing expires and hire another real estate firm same day, knowing they're going to get paid, and so I don't get paid? Sure, but she's going to pay. That's the thing. It's there to take away the temptation to just go, oh, no. And because, let me tell you, not only might she do that intentionally, might she try to get in touch with the buyer and say, just hold your horses, don't even make an offer right now, wait till Sunday, and I don't have to pay a commission, and I'll split it with you. I'll sell it to you cheaper because we don't have to pay anybody any commissions. Might she be tempted to do that? It's there to take that temptation away. Yes, ma'am.
So, in other words, we can find a firm on the 10th that our contract starts on the 11th.
Mm-hmm.
Fine. So if, let's say, they started on the 12th and she got an offer on the 11th,
Mm-hmm.
then she would be obligated to pay the over.
She would know. If she gets an offer and doesn't accept it till she's already listed with another firm, it's not when the offer comes, it's when she accepts it.
Right, so, okay.
So, but it didn't come through the original firm.
Doesn't matter who it comes through. Whoever you have a listing agreement with at that point in time is going to get paid. And if you don't have a listing agreement with anybody at that point in time, the previous firm's going to get paid because of this extender clause.
So in this situation, you would lose the potential for getting the full 6% if she listed with someone else and you could still present the offer and co-broker that.
I could. So in that case, I could bring the offer and represent the buyer potentially and maybe get half of it, you know, in that particular kind of a case. But I would lose the listing side for sure. Yes.
Who sets the terms of how many days?
It's negotiable. That's why it's a blank.
Yeah,
That's why it's a blank. Now, your firm might have a policy about it. Generally speaking, I've always put 30 days. Because my thought process has been no seller is going to wait out 30 days to try to keep me from getting paid a commission. Does that make sense? You know, to me, I wanted to allow enough time that if the agreement ended, that any buyer who became interested in the property while I was there would have had plenty of time to make an offer. And truthfully, are most sellers going to immediately relist anyway?
Yes.
Yeah, most of them are going to immediately hire somebody else anyway, which takes this thing right out of the water. I mean, this goes away the instant you hire somebody else. This is only in effect if the seller doesn't hire somebody else. Yes, ma'am, Molly.
But either way, you out your money.
No, not either way.
I mean, but I'm saying if she moves on to a new.
If she hires a new firm, then the old firm is not going to get paid. That is correct. If she hires a new firm. But if she didn't hire a new firm, you as the listing firm would still be owed that commission. The idea is you produce the buyer. She doesn't have any representation now. Still owes the commission. Yep. Okay, everybody good with that? Yes, ma'am.
If that expires, she does not hire a new broker, then you continue to work with this person and come back in, you're now coming in as buyer stage.
That becomes much stickier. That's a great question. Everybody hear her question? She said, who the hell do I represent if I still present that offer? You know, because if our listing agreement expires and she doesn't hire somebody else, and the seller doesn't hire somebody else, doesn't renew the listing agreement with me, and this buyer comes back after the fact within this extended time period but after the listing is expired and wants to present an offer, who do I represent? My guess is when you went to that seller and said, this buyer still wants to put in an offer, you're going to have to pay me one way or another. Do you want me to represent you? They probably say what? Yes. The most sensible thing would be just to renew the listing agreement and go ahead and deal with that one buyer. Even if you just renewed it for that day, you know, so you can, because you got to represent somebody. It would say. Now, again, the truth is, this is much bigger of an issue on a test than it is in the real world. Because if somebody's trying to sell their house and their listing expires, what are they probably going to do? They're going to relist it with somebody else right away anyway. Okay? We all understand? We good for it? Understand what it would be on the test. Okay? Other things that show up on the listing agreement. Make sure all the sellers are listed. So what would you do? Pull up what? How would you determine you got all the sellers? Pull up the deed. Pull up the deed. Get the deed and see whose name's on there. Is that even enough? No. Ask questions. What questions? So if you pull up the deed and you see one person on the deed, what question should you ask that one person when you're signing the listing agreement? You're not married, are you? Do I owe you some congratulations? Do you owe me a signature? Is there another person that needs to be signing this thing? So pulling the deed is definitely a good thing to do, but you still need to ask questions. As far as commission goes, let's talk about how the commission shows up on this thing. In paragraph 7, we said that's the total fee, correct? Are we going to be splitting that fee most likely? Yes. Look over on page 2. Paragraph 8. See where it says cooperation, compensation to other firms? Everybody see where I am? This page what? 3, sorry. Next page. Yeah, next page. I need Paul Harvey to read page numbers for me. Now that's dating me right there. See, that tells you I'm old. Some of y'all have no idea who that is that I'm talking about. I don't like you people. One of these days I'll tell you the rest of the story. Paragraph 8, compensation to other firms. This is the cooperation page. This is where you decide how much of the total commission is going to be shared with a firm that brings you what? A buyer. Now here's what you need to keep in mind, folks. This is sharing what you've already decided you were going to charge. This is not in addition to. I, as a broker in charge, have on occasion had these turned in. I look over on page 2 in paragraph 7 and I see firm's compensation, 3% of the sales price. And then I look over on page 3 in number 8, cooperation with other firms. And that second box is checked, cooperate with buyer agents representing the buyer and offer them 3% of the gross sales price. And I go back to the agent and I say, gosh, you're such a nice person. So awesome of you to work for free. And then they get this puzzled look on their face, like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you're charging 3% and you're giving away 3%. I'm not a math major, but 3 minus 3 is what? 0. Oh, no. I mean, I'm keeping 3% on my side and then I'm paying 3% on the other side. I said, but that is not what that document you just turned in says. Because that document says you're charging a total commission of 3 and then you're giving away what? 3. Which means you're keeping 0. So what should it say? On page 2 it should say what? 6. And then on page 3 it should say 3. Now, here's where we're going to do commission split math later tonight. I don't want you to overcomplicate things. Now, some of these commission split questions are going to be complex, but some of them are really simple. Here's going to be the problem. Once you start doing the complex ones, you don't want to do the simple ones anymore. And I don't mean you don't want to do them, I mean you're stubborn and you refuse to do it. You're like, I can't do that. I don't know what they're saying. Because they'll say something like this. The listing firm's charging 6%. They're cooperating with other firms by offering them 2.5% of the total commission, or the total sales price. How much is the listing firm keeping?
3.5.
Yeah, you think? 3.5? Because you're charging how much? 6, and how much of that are you giving away? 2.5, what does that leave you left with? Hold on to that when we get later tonight, because you're going to be like, I don't know how to do this math. Yes, you do. Come on. It's not that hard, right? 6 minus 2.5 is what? 3.5. So if it says 5 on the first page and it says 3 on the second page, how much are you keeping? 2. Does that make sense? Because 3 plus 2 equals 5, shockingly, right? So it don't make it harder than it has to be when we talk about the commission split stuff. Everybody good on commission here? All right? All right, so those are the 2 lines that deal with commission. Now, if you look back at the slides, one of the other things it says is there has to be a non-discrimination statement. Every listing agreement has to have a non-discrimination statement. We talked about this a little bit, right? We said that in any agency agreement, there has to be a non-discrimination statement. So let's find it in this listing agreement. It is on the top of page 4. On the top of page 4 it says, the agent shall not conduct or shall conduct all brokerage activities in regard to this agreement without respect to the race, color, religion, sex, national origin, handicap, or familial status. And we said familial status means what? Children. Children. Not families, but children of any party or prospective party to the agreement. Here's an interesting thing. That's what the law requires right there. This document actually goes further than that. And the reason this document goes further than that is that the National Association of Realtors, for many years now, has actually had within their code of ethics additional fair housing rules and protections. So if you choose to be a realtor, you're actually taking on more responsibility for non-discrimination. And it makes it clear that it's a realtor rule, not a federal rule, because it says, furthermore, realtors have an ethical duty to conduct such activities without respect to the sexual orientation or gender identity of any party or prospective party to this agreement. So, those two are not protected classes under the Federal Fair Housing Act. They're not protected classes under the North Carolina Fair Housing Act. But if you are a realtor, you must honor those two protected classes because the Realtor Code of Ethics says you will. If you don't, you could be kicked out of the association, which means, of course, you could lose your access to the MLS. So, just FYI. Right, which means you not get out of work, pretty much. Okay. Let's see. What else? That's all I have on the slide. So let me see if there's anything else I need to point out to you in this listing agreement specifically here. Most of it is marketing stuff that we don't need to talk about for test-taking purposes. Paragraph 11 is interesting though. Paragraph 11, which is on page 5, the earnest money paragraph. So talk to me, what is earnest money? I know we haven't done the sales contract chapter yet, but what is earnest money? What does that mean to you if I say earnest money? It's a deposit. A deposit for what purpose?
Indicate intent.
Indicate intent by who?
Okay.
The buyer. It indicates that the buyer is earnest, right? Or is serious about the purchase. And it's a deposit. It gets held in a trust account. Does that make sense? And it under certain circumstances would be refundable to the buyer, and under certain circumstances would be lost, would be forfeited. Because most deposits, isn't that the way they work? You put a deposit, and why do you put a deposit? In case you do what? In case you screw up, right? Isn't that what most people, why do you put a tenant security deposit? In case you what? In case you mess the place up. You put an earnest money deposit in case you screw up as a buyer. What would be screwing up as a buyer? Not what? Not closing, not buying the property. So an earnest money deposit is usually something that's going to be placed by the buyer and held in escrow or in trust. And if you read about the earnest money here, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, the most likely place an earnest money deposit is going to be held is in the trust account of the listing firm. Because if you think about it, if you're the seller, who would you want holding the earnest money deposit? Well, you can't, the seller can't hold it, but you'd want the seller's agent holding it, right? If you're the seller, you'd be like, well, the best place to hold it is my agent to hold it. I feel safe with that. Does that make sense? So traditionally, it doesn't have to be, it could be anybody, but traditionally the listing firm is the most likely place for the earnest money to be held. Well, look at this paragraph here. It says, unless otherwise provided in the sales contract, any initial and additional earnest money deposits paid in connection with any transaction shall be held by the firm in escrow until the consummation or termination, so closing or termination of the transaction. Any earnest money forfeited by reason of buyer's default under a sales contract shall be, what is that next word? divided equally between who? The firm and the seller. So the listing agreement actually specifies that if the seller was to get the earnest money in a transaction as a result of a buyer breaching the transaction, they only get how much of it? Half. And who gets the other half? The listing firm does. That paragraph is one that not a lot of sellers are aware exists in there. So, just FYI, it's there.
So you better know you want it, and you're gonna lose that money.
I'm sorry?
I said you better know you want that house, you're gonna lose that money.
Right, as a buyer, you better be pretty sure you want to buy the house or you could forfeit that money. We'll talk about the specifics of when it would be refundable, when it's not refundable, but the overall purpose of earnest money is to show you're serious about the purchase. So obviously you're placing it at risk.
Question, so does, I know like, when I bought houses, you know, some of 200, some like 500, is that something that the seller makes up the amount of money earnest money to put down? Or?
The amount of the earnest money deposit, it's negotiable. So that's part of the offer process, is offering an earnest money deposit. When was this that you were purchasing property in 18 what? I'm just wondering with $200 and $500 earnest money.
Well, you spent 500, what?
I only have $200 earnest money, that's it.
What year was that?
Like 3 years ago.
Like 3 years? Where? Really?
Yeah.
Good luck looking out there now. Now, you could expect to see total between due diligence fees and earnest money deposits closer to $10,000.
Wow.
And that's on a $150,000 price point.
Wow.
Mhm.
No wonder people keep paying about that.
Super competitive. Super competitive.
Wow.
Cost, rather.
Uh-huh.
So you gotta really.
I have, now, so we'll talk about, there's another amount of money out there that's non-refundable. As soon as you pay it, it's gone. That amount of money has gotten to be $10,000 in some transactions.
Oh,
Are you talking about like $4.5 million?
No, I'm talking about $300,000 houses.
what?
Because the buyers can no longer compete on price. They've already driven the price up to the point that it's absurd. It won't appraise. So how do you make your offer more competitive? Higher due diligence fees, higher earnest money deposits. And you just basically say to the seller, take my money, please. It's the market right now.
It sounds like this is time to be in it.
If you're a seller, it's a horrible time if you're a buyer.
But earnest money goes towards the purchase price, right?
They do go toward the purchase price, but what they do is they take leverage away from the buyer on things like repairs. I mean, look at it this way. If the buyer's already into this thing for $10,000 and they're asking the seller, please fix the HVAC system, what's the seller likely to say? No. Good luck. Enjoy your broken air conditioner. Because you've already paid me for it, whether you get it or not. That's the attitude. That's the prevalent attitude, for sure. Do we understand? Everybody got on this paragraph? Okay? And we're going to talk a lot more about offers and due diligence fees and all that sort of thing. That is pretty much it. Oh, look over on page 6, though. I'll point this out. Over on page 6, there's a place for you to list the current liens on the property. This is here because, remember, it's a material fact that your client can complete the transaction. Is it pretty important that we know how much money they owe on the property so that we can make sure that they can actually close on this thing? Because if we've gone through and we've estimated the market value of the home at $200,000, and they show us a mortgage statement they owe $205, we in trouble, right? I mean, there's a problem here. And so they have included this as a reminder to you that you need to know what the outstanding liens are on the property. You need to list them here. So ask them for a copy of their mortgage statement. There's a question down here, are they under bankruptcy protection or are they considering bankruptcy protection? Because remember, that's a material fact. So that just gets into their ability. I love at the bottom of page 6, just as a reminder, in case you don't remember, manufactured homes are what?
Personal property.
They are cars. They are personal property. So So here it says complete only if there's a manufactured home on the property that the seller includes to transfer as part of the sale. And you want to list what? The VIN, the vehicle identification number. I'm trying to discipline myself how to say VIN number. I do it all the time. But technically the N stands for number, right? So it's not a VIN number, it's a VIN. Like ATM machine, it's just an ATM because the M stands for machine. Or PIN, it's not a PIN number, it's a PIN, right? Because the N already stands for number. We all do it, but you know, I'm trying to fix myself. See, if I can fix that, if I can fix realtor, then I can fix VIN number, right? You know, so I'm working on it all.
Say good luck with it.
Working on all of it.
You gonna catch you really.
You will, and I expect you to call me on it too. Paragraph 17 on page 8 is the last thing we need to talk about, and it is probably, outside of the compensation section, the most important part of the listing agreement. Because we have not yet talked about our friend dual agency with this seller. Remember, with the seller, we need to know in advance if they are approving of what? Dual agency. Because we need to know in advance if we can even show this property to buyer clients that our firm represents. Does that make sense for everybody? Because if the seller says no to dual agency, can we show this property to any buyer clients that we represent?
No.
We sure cannot. We cannot. So, we need to have a conversation with the seller about dual agency. Or, maybe we don't. Let me ask you a question. If you're affiliated with a firm where there's almost no chance of dual agency happening, do you need to bother to have this discussion? No. That would be me. My firm consists of me, my mom, and Leslie. Leslie doesn't represent buyers, so there's no chance that she's going to show a buyer client my listing. My mom lives in Lake Gaston. What are the odds that she's going to have a buyer client that's interested in my listing? Pretty slim. And I don't do true dual agency where I personally represent the buyer and the seller at the same time. So when I'm taking a listing, do you think I spend 20 minutes explaining dual agency to my seller client? No, because it's a waste of time for me, because I know it's not going to happen. Does that make sense for everybody? So rather than scare them to death and spend 20 minutes explaining something that's not going to happen, if you scroll down, look at those lines down at the bottom. There are 3 initial lines down there. Look at the middle one. It says the seller desires what? Exclusive representation at all times and does not authorize dual agency. So I would have them initial right there. I don't need to explain dual agency because it's not going to happen. Now, I would have to know, of course, that if my firm by some chance had a buyer client that wanted to look at that listing, would we have to come back and change this?
Yes.
Yes, but the odds are astronomical of that. If you are affiliated with a firm that has 100 brokers, are you going to need to have a conversation about dual agency? Yes, because it is a very high likelihood that dual agency is going to come up in that case. Does that make sense? So you guys will have to make a judgment call about where the cutoff is for you and whether or not it makes sense to have this discussion. Yes, ma'am, Molly.
Well, like you said, it is, like, it can't happen, because you gave us an example when we first started. You was in the car, and then they later want to see a listing that's actually yours.
Right.
Now, we talked about it.
I already represented them, right?
Yeah, you
Yep.
already represented.
So it could conceivably happen. And if it did, I would have to come back and get them to change, right? What line would I have to get them to initial then? The first one, that the seller does authorize what? Dual agency. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and help you out. I'm gonna make you popular with your broker in charge now when you get into business. Don't turn one of these in with both lines initial. It happens all the time. And I'm like, what does this mean? Because you've got one line that says we do authorize dual agency, and the next line says what? We don't. You cannot be both. It's one or the other of those first 2 lines. Does everybody see that? Now, yes ma'am, Michelle.
Do you just scratch it out?
Yes, put a line through
Okay,
it.
'cause I was like-
We don't call that scratching it out. But put a line through it, but I knew what you meant, right?
Okay.
Right? Put one line through it, change it, date the change. That's it. Initial and date to change. Okay? That's how you make any change on a contract.
Okay.
Okay? Now, the third line. We need to talk about that one. The third line is there to authorize what? Designated dual agency. Here's the thing. Don't forget that designated dual agency is a form of what? Dual agency. You can't have an initial on this line unless you also have an initial on which line?
The second line.
The first line. The first line. It is a form of dual agency, so you can't initial line 3 unless you first initial line 1. You can have line 1 by itself. You can have line 2 by itself. You can have line 1 and 3. You cannot have just line 3. Does that make sense? So if they initial line 1 but not line 3, what would they have authorized? Only true dual agency but not designated dual agency. Does that make sense? If they've initialed just line 2, what did they authorize? No dual, no designated, just exclusive. If they've initialed lines 1 and 3, what have they authorized? Dual agency and designated dual agency. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay? So 3 cannot be by itself. And that's pretty much it. Everybody signs. Now, one thing you need to remember, and on the signature page, I'll show you this. From now on, anything you sign as a real estate broker, you're always going to put your name and your license number on it. You'll be issued a license number, and from that point forward, every time you sign something as a real estate broker, you put your name and license number. The reason they have you do that is because your name could change, but your license number never will, and they won't be able to track you down. So if you get married or you get divorced, your name might change, so it's harder to look somebody up by their name, but that license number is going to always stay the same. You can get a stamp for it if you want to. Most of the time, you're probably going to prepare it in like a document preparation software anyway, like zip forms. You're probably going to just be typing it in. Like, for example, this is all pre-formatted for me. If I go into my zip forms account, it's going to fill in my name, my license number, my phone number, my email address. All that stuff is just pre-populated. Yeah, it's pre-populated for me. So, and that'd be up to you if you want to pay for something like that. Well, that's what I'm saying. But you have to pay for zip forms, though. That doesn't come free, you know. So, the stamp's not free either. So it's a matter of what, how you want to do it, how productive you want to be. And the reason I use something like zip forms is because I use it as a digital signature. I don't ever actually print this on paper for most of my clients. Now, if I have a client who doesn't do the electronic thing, that's okay. And don't make assumptions based on age. I have had 85-year-olds who want to do digital signatures, and I've had 25-year-olds who want it on paper. You know, you just can't make assumptions about that sort of. I had a client who's 82 asked me if he could pay a due diligence fee with Venmo, and I about fell out. I was like, "Can you do what?" And he's like, "Venmo is easy. Can I do it that way?" I'm like, "Yeah, man, go ahead with your bad self. Of course you can Venmo them if you want to." I'm like, "Sounds good." See, half y'all don't even know what it is, right? It is a peer money sharing app. It's like Cash App or PayPal or is it owned by PayPal? So Venmo is basically just a peer-to-peer money sharing system. It ties to your bank account, and you go in, you say, "I want to send JJ $5,000, and it sends it. And it sends it right to your bank account. So, you know, it was designed for, like, you go out to dinner with your friends, and, you know, instead of everybody having to get cash to chip in, one person could pay and everybody else could just Venmo them. Or, you know, or you and your friends go buy concert tickets and you buy all the tickets, and they need to give you their money for their ticket. They can just go in and boom, here's the money.
Where have I been?
Yeah.
Under a rock somewhere. You know? Talk to a millennial. They'll help you with it. You know.
That cash just works like that too.
Talk to a millennial. You gotta love millennials, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I do. I like them. I think they're fun. I think they're great. You know.
It kind of scared me so much how fast everything is changing. But
hold on, I gotta show you something.
happy
Because
with the page.
we're done with the listing agreement anyway.
I know where the page goes. The cell phone is locked cell phone, you know? The cell phone bigger than your head. Look at that, fake cell phone, that thing big old.
The internet's so slow for it. Alright, he's out there downloading stuff on the internet. Why is it slow? Skip.
Well, we love the cash app.
What, since when are there 2 ads on YouTube now?
Alright, baby,
Great, it's a conversation.
more than that.
He sits inside your local coffee shop, sporting a running facial hair. Somehow he lies, although he has no job, and by his 30s he will be a millionaire. M-I-L-L-E-N, gotta love a lady, yours. M-I-L-L-E-N, M-I-L-L. She posts lots of selfies on her Instagram with the quote that's inspiration. Hopes to change the world while living younger. With her dreams and knowledge of his maybe we're just wrong. Criticism isn't easy for their ears. They feel like they know most everything. See, they grew up with undeserving confidence, 'cause they got trophies just for in a couple of years, we will have to pass the torch. In a couple of years, they will be in charge, and one will be our president.
I love that.
Maybe grow up, maybe get 35. He did it 27.
It is, you've gotta love millennials is the name of it. Yeah, I love that. I saw that like a year and a half ago, and I watched it like 5 times. I was crying laughing so hard, you know.
That's all my children.
You know, it's so. And the thing of it is, I don't even pick on millennials because our generation, we're so messed up too. It's like, you know, every generation's got their own thing, you know, but bless their hearts.
That part about the trophy just that showed up. That was
The
really
participation trophies, that's definitely an interesting dynamic for that generation. Well, the funny thing is, people criticize them for it. I'm like, they didn't do it, we did, right? They were just there. So, all right. So that is the exclusive right to sell listing agreement from the Association of Realtors. All right. Any questions? We feel okay about that? Go ahead, JJ.
On the very first page, it has an area that refers to expiration date, expires on, and then below it, it's got under C expiration date.
Yeah.
What's the differentiation between those 2 lines?
So in the first blank line up there is, excuse me, first of all, the effective date is the date the agreement's signed, okay? The first blank line there, you see, it says the property is currently listed for sale exclusively with another real estate firm. Seller represents that the current listing agreement expires on blank. So you would use that line if you were talking to Marlo, the seller, who has her property listed with somebody else right now, but she wants you to take over the listing as soon as that listing expires.
Oh my goodness.
Right? So she's already stepping out on her firm, right? She's like, their listing agreement expires on Friday. I want somebody in here on Saturday. I am sick of them. I want somebody else right away. So that's where you would, that's what that line is for. You would only use that line if it was already listed with another firm. Okay? Everybody okay with that? All right. So go back over to your slides and we want to talk about square footage and then we'll take our first break, or living area. This is a major issue for real estate brokers. And the interesting thing is, it doesn't have to be, because one of the first things the Real Estate Commission would say to you as a real estate broker is, well, you don't have to do it, because living area is not material fact. I'm going to say that again, living area, square footage, is not a material fact. So go back and talk to me. Material facts are things that we have to do what with? We have to disclose any material facts that we know or reasonably should have known. When I say that square footage is not a material fact, what does that mean about it? We don't have to disclose it. Well, just because we don't have to, does that mean we're not going to? No, as a matter of fact, we probably are going to. And the reason we're probably going to do it anyway is because your seller is going to expect it. And aren't most buyers going to expect to see it when they start looking in the MLS and looking at property? It's going to be very much an expected part of the marketing. That's why it's such a problem for real estate brokers. The Real Estate Commission takes no mercy on us when it comes to square footage. Because from their perspective, imagine this. Here's what they're essentially saying. We don't trust you to do this, so you don't have to do it. But if you choose to do it, you better be accurate. Because a lot of times what happens is brokers get in front of the Real Estate Commission and they've misrepresented the square footage. And they go, I'm so sorry, I didn't know what I was doing. And the Real Estate Commission goes, yeah, that's why we didn't make you do it anyway. You chose to do it, dummy. You see what I'm saying from their perspective? That's why they're so hard on us about this. Because from their perspective, this is a choice. We all know the reality is if you're going to market residential property, it's not much of a what? It's not much of a choice. Yes, ma'am, Michelle.
Is that why it would be a good idea to hire an inspector?
I would hire somebody,
Yeah,
not
a
an
surveyor.
inspector, but somebody, an appraiser.
Oh,
An appraiser.
yes.
We're going to talk about that. About the best ways to go about this. And Michelle is exactly right. We, in order to take this liability off of our shoulders, if we choose to publish a square footage, it's probably a good idea to either make sure you truly are an expert at measuring a house, or hire somebody who is an expert at measuring a house. And there's only one somebody in this state who's certified to measure houses, and that would be an appraiser. A licensed appraiser, they are taught how to measure property. So if you hire them, you're taking that liability off of your shoulders and putting it where? On theirs. By the way, you can usually find a licensed appraiser who will measure a listing for about 75 bucks and give you a pretty little drawing with all the rooms and all the dimensions. Is that a pretty cheap insurance policy? Well, let me tell you, you might decide $75 is not worth it, because let me tell you what could happen, so you'll have to decide if it's worth it. I just talked to a broker up in Briar Creek a couple months ago. And she sold a house up there in 2005. That's a long time ago, isn't it? There's no statute of limitations on misrepresentation and omission, by the way. Wow. She sold a house up there in 2005. She was the listing broker. She listed the property for sale. She listed it at 3,300 square feet. And it sold to buyers who she also represented. It was a dual agency transaction. So she also represented the buyers. The buyers paid cash for the house. And when you pay cash, nobody's going to force you to have an appraisal. Now, could she give the buyers the advice, you should have the property measured, you should hire an appraiser? Because she's what? She's a dual agent. So she can't give them any advice. So guess what they didn't do? They didn't do an appraisal. They bought the house, paid cash. Now, they're ready to sell that house. Here in 2018. They hired a different broker. They didn't hire her. They hired a different broker. And this broker went over and said, you know, here's what I think the house is worth. And of course, she was basing it on the square footage from the last listing. That's a fair thing to base it on when you're doing a market analysis. Does that make sense? But she knew when she listed it, she had to measure it herself or hire an appraiser to measure it. So she always hires an appraiser to measure her listings. So this broker hired an appraiser to go measure the house. The appraiser measured it 3 times to make sure. 2,800 square feet. 2,800 square feet. 500 square foot difference. Now, right now, square footage in Briar Creek's going for about $180 a square foot. That's only $90,000. And do you know who's liable for that $90,000 loss?
The broker, the previous.
The real estate broker. The listing broker from all those years ago, because she misrepresented the square footage. So now I'll go back and say, you have to decide if the $75 insurance policy is worth it for you or not. I am pretty good at measuring a house. I don't do it. I hire an appraiser. Because whether I'm good at it or not is beside the point from my perspective. For me, it's the cheapest insurance policy I can have against being sued for a misrepresentation of living area. Does that make sense for everybody? So, because here's what the law says. One of two things has to happen. Either the listing broker themselves has to personally measure the property, or they have to hire an appraiser to do so. Those are the only 2 acceptable ways to determine the square footage. Yes, ma'am?
So on, like, county websites, where are those figures coming from? Are they coming from?
Thin air. Thin air. They estimate it. They don't actually measure the property. And they are wildly inaccurate.
And this is what,
She asked about the county tax website. You go on there, there's a living area square footage number, and she asked where they come from. I said, thin air.
so they don't have no appraisal going out and counting that?
They do. They have appraisers visit the property, but they do not actually measure the property because they never even go inside the property.
They didn't go inside.
They never go inside. So they might measure it from the outside, which is where you're supposed to measure, by the way. You measure from the outside. But do you have to go inside and look for things to subtract out? Like a garage, for example? See, there's no way I know how big the garage is if I'm on the outside of the house. So I'm guessing about how much to subtract away. So those square footages you see on tax records, wildly inaccurate. And so you should never use those as a listing broker. Your options are do what? Measure it yourself or hire an appraiser to do it for you. Don't ever use tax records. Don't ever use old appraisals. Why can't you use an old appraisal? They could have had an addition, a change. It could have knocked out a wall. It could have, whatever. It could have done something different to the property. So you've got to measure it. You can't use the builder's floor plan. You have to have it measured for the listing.
Which is a good point, because we had a house built and we used a certain floor plan, and when we completely changed it, what we submitted was the old plan, like the basic plan, and we completely added areas and
End up being built different.
totally different. Yeah.
Well, and not only that, here's what happens a lot of times. What you have to remember is the floor plan is, bought by the corporate builder from some architect, right? then you have the on-site builder, and they're working with a bunch of subcontractors. So the subcontractor goes out and he puts the foundation wall 3 feet too far this way. Well, they're not going to come back and dig it up and move it. They're just going to build it what? 3 feet further out that way. So the house is bigger now than the floor plan. It happens all the time. Or 2 feet back this way and it's smaller than the floor plan. And that's why you can't go off of those things. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay? So, measure it yourself or hire an appraiser. Those are the only 2 acceptable things. So now we want to talk about, because the Real Estate Commission does publish, that's what this book is, the square footage guidelines for you in case you decide. Remember, it's not a material fact. So if you decide to list square footage, this book is available to you from the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. And what you need to know for test taking purposes are the basic criteria for living area. These are the only criteria in North Carolina for living area. It's not a long list. There's some things that a lot of people think would be on here that aren't on here. One I'm going to point out right away. Nowhere in this list will you see permitted as a criteria for it being living area. I hear this all the time in my line of work. You can't count that as living area because it's not permitted. Here's the criteria, folks. Where do you see permitted there? It's not a criteria. It's a material fact that it's not permitted. You have to disclose that it's not permitted, but does it count in the total square footage? Yes, if it meets this criteria, it counts.
So, question, so if they say a house is 2,000 square feet, but there's 500 that's unpermitted.
That's unpermitted.
So the house is really.
No, the house is really 2,000 square feet. But you just need to know that 500 square feet if it's unpermitted. There's 1,500 square feet that's permitted and another 500 unpermitted. But as far as living area and square footage go in North Carolina, because permitted is not one of the rules, it counts. Are you with me on that? So you just apply this criteria strictly across the board. And this is the way it's going to be given to you on the test. Number 1, permanently what?
Heated.
Does it say heated and cool?
No.
No. I'm not living there if it's not cool, but apparently somebody thinks that's not required. Living area in North Carolina must be permanent. And here's the key word, permanently heated. It's not heated, but permanently heated. That means some permanently installed heat source. And even that's not very strict. A propane heater attached to the wall, is that a permanent heat source? It is. It is. Because it's attached. A fireplace, is that a permanent heat source?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Baseboard electric heat, is that a permanent heat source? Yes. Space heaters, is that a permanent heat source? No, that would not be a permanent heat source. Yes, ma'am.
Or a freestanding fireplace would not be.
What's a freestanding fireplace?
You know, like those ones that you plug in?
No, that's a space heater.
Oh.
That's a
it just
space
looks like
heater.
a
It looks like a
oh.
fireplace, but
Okay.
it's a space heater. Yeah. Okay, I got you now. I understand what you're saying now. Yeah. So like the ones they have in Lowe's when you walk in the wintertime. Right. That is not a permanent heat source because it's not attached in any way and it plugs into the wall. Okay. We good on criteria number 1. Permanently what? Heated. Criteria 2 deals with the interior finishes. Mostly with ceiling height. Because interior finishes has a lot of gray area, right? I mean, the rule, the law just says interior finishes. A lot of that gets to be debatable. Does that make sense for you folks? I mean, because even concrete could conceivably be an interior finish in some application. That's why you have to use your best judgment, you know. You'll also have to use your best judgment as to does it match. Usually what it comes down to is does it match the interior finishes of the remainder of the property? Because I've been in some of the, you know, like for example, you might go into an old warehouse that's been converted into lofts. And a lot of people might say those finishes are not interior finishes, but by those standards, they are. You know, they want that exposed brickwork and they want the concrete floors. I mean, heck, they might have concrete countertops, you know, and so It really is more about weighing it against. What you don't want is, well, everything else is sheetrock and carpet, and here out here it's bare concrete and and studs. That's not an interior finish. All right, is everybody good with that? But the one that doesn't have any gray area is the ceiling height rule. Minimum ceiling height, 7 feet on a flat ceiling. This is a flat ceiling. So in a room like this, on a flat ceiling, one that's parallel to the floor, the minimum ceiling height is what? 7 feet. If the room has sloping ceilings, y'all know what sloping ceilings are? Ceilings that come down at an angle, then the minimum height is 5 feet. It goes down to 5 feet for sloping ceilings. Okay? So 7 for a flat ceiling, 5 for sloping ceilings. I didn't write the rule.
I had an old, of course, it's a mistake,
Mhm.
an old house, 29 years old Cape Cod. And our slope ceilings were maybe 4.
Right.
I mean, you could only really walk down the center of the room.
So what you do in North Carolina is you would take a tape measure and pull it out to 5 feet, and you would go up and you would measure, and you would find a place on that ceiling as it comes up where the distance from the floor to the ceiling was 5 feet. Anything shorter than that wouldn't count. Anything taller than that would count.
Oh, so, I got you, so on the slope.
On the slope,
Foot up the slope.
you would come up until you got 5 feet of clearance. So basically take a tape measure and hold your finger at 5 feet, other end's on the floor, right? And you just go over till you bump the wall. Right there, that's where the room starts. So put a piece of tape on the floor. And then go to the other side of the room, do the same thing, put a piece of tape on the floor, and then measure the 2 pieces of tape, and that's the size of the room.
Now, what do you do when the ceiling is like 6, 9.5?
Then you don't have a room.
You don't have enough.
Because if it's a flat ceiling, the flat part of the ceiling always has to be at least 7 feet. Even in a room that has sloping ceilings, whatever the flat part is has to be at least 7 feet. So if the flat part's not at least 7, none of it counts. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
So with the sloping and, because obviously sloping, most times you talk about top of house.
Right, like a walk-up attic that's
The
been
room
finished.
upstairs
Right.
that's finished and all that.
Bonus room over a garage.
And all that.
Northeasterners call it a frog. Have y'all ever heard that? A frog room? Front room over garage? That was a new one for me when I got into real estate. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you, like some of them don't even ever go flat. Like my house,
Yep.
my house that I bought down this road, it was all triangles.
Yep. Mhm.
So you just really going from that triangle point down as far as the height.
Sloping ceiling, so what are you looking for?
Yeah, the bottom up to the 5.
Up to 5 feet. So you're going to find where the slope, as the slope is coming down, wherever that height drops to 5 feet. So find somebody who's exactly 5 feet tall. And where they bump their head, that's where the room starts.
Yeah. But
That's the way to think of it, right? Because you're looking for where that ceiling drops to 5 feet. Right there, that's the start of the room.
That's the side of the room.
That's the
But
side of the room.
The top is.
That don't matter. You ain't got wings attached to your ass. You're not flying around up there. Get that out of your head. What matters is where the room starts side to side.
But I'm trying to ask about the 7 feet.
It doesn't matter. 7 feet only matters on what kind of ceilings. Flat ceilings. If the room has nothing but slope ceilings, then what matters? 5 feet.
What if they have both? Because one of my rooms did have that.
Then the flat part has to be what? 7. And the slope, the room is going to start where it drops to 5 feet. That's what I'm saying. Don't worry about the peak. That doesn't matter. The peak never matters. Okay? What matters is a flat ceiling's got to be 7, and a slope ceiling has to be 5.
Because 2 different appraisers measure different.
Sometimes that
There's a
happens.
3,400 square foot house.
Right.
And they start measuring and they're measuring different.
Yeah, they can. They're not perfect. Everybody okay with that with the ceiling height rule? Because it can be tricky. And again, so if you got a bunch of slope ceilings and stuff, is it time to call somebody else? Absolutely. And number 3, the third criteria, and this is the big one for real world purposes and test taking purposes, directly accessed from other living area. In other words, there can't be any gaps. You got a finished basement. Great. How do you get to it?
You gotta walk down the stairs.
Because if you got to go outside, it's not living area. You got a finished room above your garage. Great. But if you got to go in the garage to get to it, is it living area? No. It's got to be directly accessed from other living area. You never go into an unfinished space on the way there. You never go outside on the way there. Anything that's got a separation like that is not going to count as living area. So for example, somebody finishes their attic, but they don't finish the stairs on the way up to the attic. You got bare studs, no heat, and then you just got a door at the top of the stairs, but you got a nice room up there. Some people do that because they do it for like a kid's playroom, right? And you walk up, but you walk up the stairs, and the stairs are just like, it's just attic stairs. Well, guess what? That room is not living area. It does. Now, it doesn't mean it doesn't have some value, because if you marketed it, you would say, oh, and additionally, there's a room that's finished in the attic. But what you can't do is count it in that square footage number. It doesn't count as part of that number because it's not going to be living area. So if you had that, if I was going to do a listing presentation on that house, and they had a really nice room finished in that 3rd floor, that attic, what used to be the attic, and it's heated and cooled. I mean, they got air conditioning up there, they got a pool table up there, they put a wet bar up there, they got the whole 9 yards. But the stairs are unfinished. What advice would I probably give them? Finish the stairs. Because the cost of finishing the stairs is going to be tiny compared to the value of being able to count all of this square footage as living area. Because not only are we going to be able to add the square footage of the stairs as living area, but the actual room itself, because it connects it all. Does that make sense?
But it's also got to be permanent pieces, so you gotta have ductwork or something.
In the stairs. But I'm assuming up there is already done. I'm just saying, if you go and all the up there is everything's great, done, heated, the whole 9 yards, and the only thing that's not done is the stairs, finish the stairs. I actually had one like that. If you've watched the videos, you've probably heard me tell the story before. I had one similar with a house up at Lake Gaston years ago. And this family had the prototypical live-in child who was like 37. And they had finished a basement apartment for him. The house had been built with an unfinished basement, but they had come back in and finished him. There was a daylight, a walkout basement, and they had finished him a whole house down there. It was 1,400 square feet.
Wow.
I mean, it had hardwood floors, a kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. It had a pool table. It had a fireplace. It had a bedroom.
No wonder the kids are
Right,
home.
a bedroom with a tray ceiling. It had a bathroom with a big tile walk-in shower and a jacuzzi tub. I mean, this was nice. It was nicer than most people's house.
Yeah.
But here's how it had been built. The house was originally built with an unfinished, the whole basement was unfinished, right? So you came down the basement stairs, which were unfinished, and then you got to the bottom of the basement, and they had the washer and dryer and water heater right at the bottom of the stairs. They didn't have a laundry room. The house was not built with a laundry room because it was just, you go to the basement to do laundry. I'm sure you've seen houses that are that way, right? So it was built with just bare concrete floors and exposed studs and, cinder block walls when the house was built. Well, when they built his basement room, what they did was essentially just walled off, and because it had a French glass door out to the backyard, so they did not want to give access to him to the house or them to his thing. They basically wanted, he wanted to go and come from those French glass doors outside, and they put a door to the laundry room so he could access the laundry room. But the idea was that essentially he had his own house. Well, when they put the wall up for the laundry room, they never finished the laundry room. Well, unfortunately, that was the first thing you got to when you came down the steps. So you come down the steps from the house, and the steps had been finished, the stairs had been finished, but then you step on a bare concrete floor, exposed exposed cinder block walls, the studs, insulation, and a washer and dryer and water heater just sitting out there on the floor. And you walk 10 feet this way, and here's a sheetrock wall with a door in it, and when you open that door, here's this beautiful basement apartment house down here. And I looked at the seller, I said, we got to finish this laundry room. And she said, do you think a laundry room is that important to people? I said, I think it's important to you. Because right now you got a 3,000 square foot house. You finish this room, you got a 4,500 square foot house. Which sounds better to you? We're going to finish that room. All we do is put vinyl flooring down, put a closet around the washer and dryer, put a sheetrock ceiling in, boom. We went from 3,000 to 4,500 square feet. Because you couldn't count it as long as you had this unfinished area in the middle of it. Does that make sense? It was isolated. So I've actually dealt with that. Now, on a test, they'll test you on that by, saying, you've got this house and you've got a room that doesn't have a permanent heat source, and what's the best solution there? Well, what's the best solution going to be? Install heat. Install heat. If that's the only thing that's missing, and it's already accessible for it, then install some heat. So that's the way you're going to have to approach that on the test. Is everybody good with this criteria?
Yes.
Okay. So let's talk about how to measure. Now, I'm not going to take out a tape measure and try to teach you how to read it. I've tried it. That's a failure waiting to happen. Some folks. Like Alex. I'm sorry, I didn't say that out loud. Now, if you're going to measure yourself, you measure outside. We want exterior measurements. That's going to be tested. You're going to see that on the test. Not interior measurements, exterior measurements. When you are calculating the square footage of a home, you measure on the outside. I'm looking for my eraser. There it is. So I'll give you an idea of what I mean here. All right, if I go and I'm measuring this house, and this is 30 feet, here's 35 feet, back here is 50 feet, and then this is 30 feet across here. So those are my exterior measurements. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. What I'm going to do is draw that out after I've measured the exterior measurements, and this is a 2-story house. All right, 2-story. So I'm going to draw this picture after I've got these measurements, and the easiest way to calculate the square footage of something like this is just divide it into 2 boxes. Does that make sense? Just pretend that there's 2 rectangles there. The first rectangle is 30 by what? 30 by 50. The small rectangle is a little bit harder. We have to kind of engineer that one. Try to get off to one side of this so everybody can see. I got to kind of engineer the small rectangle. Do I know how far this is right here?
Yes.
How far? 5, because it's 35 across here and 30 over here, right? So it sticks out by 5 feet. Do I know how wide this is?
Yes.
How wide is it?
20.
20, because across the back it's 50 feet, and up to here is 30 feet of that, right? So how many square feet do I have in the small box? 20 by 5. How many is that? That's 100 square feet, right? And then the big box, which is 30 by 50, is 1,500 square feet. So what I have is 1,500 plus 100. How big is the house? Oh, is it really? It's a 3,200 square foot house. Because it's 2 stories. I'm not done though. Because what I've done is included all of the possible square footage. Is there likely to be some of that space that's not actually living area, that doesn't meet the criteria of living area? Like a garage. This jut out is probably a what? A garage. And it's probably much more than 100 square feet. It probably goes way back into here. Would you agree with that? I can't figure that out from the outside though. Now where do I need to go? Inside. So you measure outside to get your baseline square footage. Does that make sense for everybody? And then you go inside to measure for things that need to be taken away. Like a garage. Another thing you would need to take away, open air space on the second floor. How many of you have got a 2-story living room? If you got a 2-story living room, that square footage does not exist on your second floor. What you have is a first floor with a really tall ceiling. Does that make sense? So we have to subtract that space from the second floor. So we need to, and we can only do that from the inside. Because we'd have to go inside, see how big the hole was, measure it, calculate how much to subtract out. Does that make sense to everybody? So you would do that with 2-story living rooms, 2-story foyers, anywhere you've got a gap, right? Where you can stand and look, ooh, that's hot.
That's a lot of little boxes.
Could be. Could be, depending on how complicated the house is. That's why you're going to do what? Hire an appraiser. Hire an appraiser. So you really go inside to look for stuff to do what?
Take away.
Take away, to subtract out. Now, there is one catch to that. There are, on occasion, there are going to be places that you cannot measure from the outside, like a basement, like a room in the attic, right? There's no way to measure that from the outside. So in that case, you have to measure inside. You're going to have to go inside to get, so that basement square footage, you're going to have to add it with an interior measurement. Is everybody following me on that? You always try to measure outside whenever you can. But if you've got a space that can't be measured outside, like a finished basement, or an attic that's been finished, you don't have wings, as I already told Marla, right? You don't have an extension ladder. There's no way to measure that from the outside. So those spaces are going to have to be measured from the inside. Here's the thing. You've got to correct for the fact that you measured inside rather than outside. Is the measurement going to be shorter if you measure inside than outside?
Yes.
Because you didn't measure what? The walls. You've got to add 6 inches for each wall that you didn't measure. That's only if you're measuring where? Inside. If you're measuring outside, you don't have to worry about that. But if you have to take an interior measurement, add 6 inches for each wall. So if I had to measure this room as an interior measurement, I measured wall to wall, how much am I going to add? 6 inches over there, 6 over there. So a total of 1 foot in the width, and 6 inches for that wall, and 6 inches for that wall, 1 foot that way as well.
That's an interior wall, and that's an exterior.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Pretend this is like a basement. Just pretend we're in a basement. This is a finished basement, and we had to. No, that's all right. You're exactly right. You're paying. You're looking at the rules. I appreciate that. So you're good. That's what I said was just pretend this is a basement that we had to take an interior measurement of. So we would just go wall to wall and add 6 inches for each one. Everybody okay with that? Stairs. Stairs are not hard to deal with. You make them hard to deal with. Because the truth is, you don't have to do anything with them. Ignore them. Let me ask you a question. When I measured the outside of this house, didn't I already take the stairs into account?
Yes.
And when I doubled it, didn't I take them into account on both floors? Guess what? That's exactly what you're supposed to do. Because they count as living area on both floors. What's the only time you would monkey with stairs at all? That you would do anything with regard to the stairs? Think about what I said you'd be taking out. Any kind of open air space. If you've got like, you ever been in a house, I'm sure you have, that you go up one direction of the stairs and then you turn a 90-degree angle and they go up this way, and then you turn another 90-degree angle, you go up this way, and then there's a big gap in the middle as you go up where you look down? Well, that gap has got to come out of the second floor. That air space. But that's the only time you worry with it. For test taking purposes, what floor do stairs count as living area on? Both. They count as living area on both floors. Does that make sense for everybody? Here's and I'm gonna point this out, we're not in the valuation chapter, but it's a good time to point it out. That rule right there is one of the main reasons you can never compare from a value standpoint a ranch house with a 2-story house. From a value standpoint, don't ever try to base the value of a 2-story house on the value of a ranch or vice versa. Because if they are the same square footage, the ranch is actually much larger with usable space.
Well, that's right.
Because the stairs are taking up a significant portion of the quote-unquote living area in a 2-story house. In a standard 2-story house, it is not unusual for 200 square feet of the living area to be occupied by the stairs. So an 1,800 square foot ranch would have the same useful space as a 2,000 square foot 2-story house. Does that make sense for everybody? And that's why, and you'll have this experience, if you got clients that really don't care what kind of floor plan they're looking at, and they look at a ranch and they look at a 2-story, and here's the only criteria they get given you. Well, we want to be right around 2,000 square feet, and we want to see these 2 houses, and they're both 2,000 square feet. And you take them in that ranch first, and they walk around and they look at it, this is nice. And you take them in that 2-story and they're like, this is so small. But they're both what? 2,000 square feet, because here's what you have to remember. You got the equivalent of a 20 by 10 room that's taken up by the what? The stairs. Is that ranch going to feel tremendously bigger than that 2-story house is going to? So that's one of the reasons right there. In addition to much higher construction costs for a ranch. Much higher construction costs for a ranch. Because you think about it, how big is the roof on a ranch house? A 2,000 square foot ranch house, how many square feet of roof do you have? 2,000 square feet, whereas that 2-story house only has 1,000 square feet of roofing on it. How big's the foundation of a ranch by comparison? How big's the piece of land you got to develop that ranch on by comparison? So ranches are tremendously more, it costs about 50% more per square foot to construct than a 2-story house does. So you don't compare them from a value standpoint. You don't compare them from a livability standpoint either when you get old and fat, because I love not having steps. Here's what I'll predict for all of you. You all getting your real estate license, within 10 years after you get your real estate license, you will live in a ranch house. You know why? You'll be so damn sick of stairs, you won't know what to do with yourself. Because here's what you're going to have. You're going to have a day full one day of showing 3-story townhouses. And they're going to look about 8 of them. And by about number 5, now if you've never been in a 3-story townhouse, the first thing you got to do is go upstairs as soon as you go in the door, right? Because you go in the front door and you ain't even in the front door, you're in the basement, right? What I call the basement, but that's actually the first floor, because you got the garage down there. You go in, you got a little hallway, and here's the garage. There's usually one room at the back down there, and now you got to go up some stairs. And then you get on the main level. And on the main level is the living room, the kitchen, dining area. And then you got to go up another set of stairs to get to the bedroom. How many of y'all been in that floor plan before?
The one where the third floor was the bedroom.
Yeah,
and I'm just like, man, I hope you don't forget something.
Well, and that's what I always think about. I would have to want it real bad out of my car if I was in the bedroom at night up there thinking, oh, I forgot my computer. I'd be like, I don't need it. And so after about the 5th one that you've shown that day, when you're on the main level and they're talking about going to look at the master bedroom, you're going to say, y'all go ahead, I'll wait right here for you. Because you're going to be sick of climbing those stairs. So, yeah, that's what I always tell people. By about 10 years into this business, you'll be looking for a ranch house, because you'll loathe those stairs. You'll learn to hate them. Everybody good? Oops. That is it for square footage. Okay, ready to take a break? All right.
What time?
Come back at 10 o'clock. No, 8 o'clock. 5 past 8. 5 past 8.
The lowest we